This is video 2 for AP Euro on Wednesday, April 22nd. Early Socialists. These early socialists provided no singular answer to society's problems. Henri de Saint-Simon argued that society needed to be organized on a scientific basis. He argued for the creation of a hierarchical society led by an intellectual class that improved society and, most important, the lot of those on the bottom of the social ladder. Contemporary events in Europe are currently heading in a direction let Saint-Simon imagined. He hoped to witness the rise of a community of European nations that would have a common currency, transportation, and a parliament, among other things. Another utopian socialist was Charles Fourier, who created a blueprint for a cooperative community. The blueprint consisted of a self-contained group of precisely 1,620 people living on 5,000 acres of land. Fourier hoped to make the workday more satisfying by rotating tasks so that everyone would do the boring tasks, but not exclusively. Fourier thought that because children like to play with dirt, they should take care of the community's garbage. Another individual who designed a planned community, and unlike Fourier, he actually built it, was Robert Owen, a self-made manufacturer. Like Fourier, he blamed environment for man's corruption and in response built a new Lanark at Milltown, Scotland, where workers were housed decently and children received an education. These early socialists had relatively little impact in comparison with Karl Marx's proletarian socialism, which came later. All right, political restoration and reform. The term restoration literally refers to the events in France where the Bourbons were restored to the throne following the final defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo. The throne that Louis XVIII returned to was different from the one his older brother had enjoyed up until 1789. The Charter of 1814, a hastily written constitution, contained many of the freedoms from the Revolutionary period, such as freedom of religion, even though it was presented to the French people by the king, and contained no notion of popular sovereignty. The charter angered many royalists by confirming land purchases made from nationalized church property. Politically, it allowed for a constitutional monarchy with a chamber of peers and a chamber of deputies made up of a very restricted franchise. The king held the firm reins of power, however, because only he could introduce legislation, and ministers were responsible to him instead of the assembly. In 1820, the son of the younger brother Louis, Duc de Berry, was assassinated. The ultra-royalist individuals who wanted to see the revival of absolute monarchy used the assassination to pressure the king to clamp down on the pressure to the press and to give more rights to the aristocracy, including compensation for nobles who had lost land during the Revolution. Political repression increased after the death of Louis XVIII in 1824. At that time, Louis's younger brother, Charles X, came to the throne. Charles felt more bitter about the Revolution than his brother Louis had. A year after taking the throne, he introduced a law of sacrilege, which ruled death as the penalty for any attack on the church. In 1829, Charles appointed the Prince of Polignac as the chief minister, a man disliked throughout the country for being a leading ultra-royalist. In the following year, Polignac issued what became known as the July Ordinances, which dissolved the newly elected assembly, took away the right to vote from the upper bourgeoisie, and imposed rigid censorship. That same month, revolution broke out in Paris. Leading liberals were afraid of the Parisian mob and wanted to avoid the creation of a republic because they associated republics with the violence of the First French Republic dating back to 1792. Instead, they turned to Louis Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, a liberal who had stayed in France during the Revolution. The July Revolution of 1830, which sparked revolutions throughout Europe, ended with the crowning of Louis Philippe and the creation of what became known as the bourgeois or July monarchy. Revolutionary movements. By the third decade of the century, people across Europe showed signs that it would be impossible to stem their desire for change. Spain. In Spain, King Ferdinand VII had been restored to the throne following the collapse of French control in 1814. Ferdinand was restored on the condition that he honored the liberal constitution of 1812, drawn up by the Cortes, the Spanish Parliament, which had met in Cadiz, the one part of Spain that was not conquered by Napoleon. Once restored to the throne, Ferdinand dissolved the Cortes and persecuted those liberals who had drawn up the Constitution. In 1820, a rebellion began among army divisions that were about to be sent to South America to put down the rebellions against the Spanish Empire. The small Spanish middle class soon joined the army divisions in the rebellion, although the king agreed to rule under the law of the Constitution to end the rebellion. Austria, France, Prussia, and Russia wanted to intervene to stem the tide of revolt. The British, however, refused to directly intervene. They did not want the five great powers of Europe to be involved in putting down internal rebellions in other nations. 2 years later, a French army acted unilaterally, although with the tacit support of Russia, Prussia, and Austria, and restored Ferdinand to absolute power. Italy. A more serious revolt broke out in Naples, a revolt that the Austrian statesman Metternich labeled as the greatest crisis of his career. Similar to the situation in Spain, King Ferdinand of Naples had made promises while in exile to rule as a constitutional monarch, although once restored to the throne, he refused to give up any of his absolute powers. Neapolitan army of officers, perhaps inspired by the French ideas, joined with members of the bourgeoisie and began, with the assistance of secret national societies such as the Carbonari, to oppose the monarch. The revolt led to nationalistic stirrings throughout Italy and to another revolt in the Kingdom of Sardinia, which ultimately came to nothing. Metternich wanted to put down the revolt in Naples, but once again the British refused to participate in a joint attack. Metternich wanted the support of other great powers, so he called the rulers of Austria, Prussia, and Russia to the Austrian town of Troppau to create what became the Troppau Protocol, which stated that the great European powers had the right to intervene in revolutionary situations. The following year, the rebellion in Naples was put down with the help of Austrian troops. Let's do Greece. With the forces of repression everywhere triumphant, Western European liberals looked to the Greek Revolt of 1821 to free the birthplace of democracy from Eastern despotism. Though this was also part of a 1,000-year prejudice that claimed Turkish citizens lived and died at the whims of a tyrannical emperor. Some leading liberals even went to Greece to aid the rebels. The British Romantic poet Lord Byron, for instance, sent his own money to refit the Greek fleet and died amidst the struggle in Greece, not on the battlefield but for fever. By 1827, Britain, France, and Russia organized a combined naval force to intervene on the side of the Greek revolutionaries, and in the following year, the Russians attacked the Ottomans on land. By 1832, Greece declared its independence from the Ottoman Empire and became a monarchy with an imported Bavarian prince. The Greek revolt was also tied to what became known as the Eastern Question. What should be done with the increasingly weak Ottoman Empire, appropriately nicknamed the Sick Man of Europe? Like other multi-ethnic empires, the Ottoman Empire was breaking down after a series of rulers who could not keep the groups united. Europeans were also uncomfortably reminded of the threat the Ottomans had posed. The Ottoman Empire was most recently besieged Vienna less than 150 years earlier. As the Greeks were breaking away from the Ottoman Empire, so were the Serbians, who had established effective independence in 1830. The new Serbia was a small kingdom about the size of South Carolina, located north of Greece on the southern border of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Ironically, this tiny kingdom would be much greater threat to Austrian and thus European stability than the mighty Ottoman Empire ever was. The independent Serbian state strongly promoted nationalism in the Balkan regions of Austria, which ultimately led to the ethnic conflicts and revolutionary movements that started World War I. We'll stop that there. Let's go look at the key concepts real quick. We're not doing 6.2 yet. Not 6.3. Not 6.4. 6.5. Conservatives developed a new ideology in support of traditional power and political and religious authorities, and was based on the idea that human nature was not perfectible. The concept of Europe, or the Congress system, sought to maintain the status quo through collective action inherent to conservatism. Metternich, architect of the concept of Europe, used it to suppress nationalistic and liberal revolutions. Conservatives reestablished control in many European states and attempted to suppress movements for change in some areas, strengthen adherence to religious authorities. 6.6 is reactions, revolutions. In the first half of the 19th century, revolutionaries attempted to destroy the status quo. This one goes kind of far. 6.7 Ideologies of change and reform movements. Liberals emphasized popular sovereignty, individual rights, and enlightened self-interest, but debated to the extent which all groups in society would actively participate in governance. Radicals in Britain and Republicans on the continent demanded universal male suffrage and full citizenship without regard to wealth and property ownership. Some argue that such rights should be extended to women. Socialists called for the redistribution of society's resources and wealth and evolved from a utopian to a Marxist scientific critique of capitalism. I think we need to cover all that. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. All right, we'll stop there.